In 1929, Will and I get to meet Alfred Hitchcock. July 28th, Hitchcock unleashed a cinematic one-of-one thriller that would define the genre for decades to come. We're talking Blackmail. Blackmail takes you on a gripping journey through the dark streets of London where a chance encounter spirals into a web of deception and danger. We follow Alice White, a young woman caught in a desperate struggle after a fateful confrontation turns deadly. But it's not just the plot that captivates, it's the innovative use of sound and visual storytelling that Hitchcock masterfully employs to keep you on the edge of your seat. As one of the first British sound films, Blackmail shattered conventions and set the stage for Hitchcock's legendary career. So if you're ready to experience the birth of cinematic suspense, well, buckle up and get ready for a thrilling ride with Alfred Hitchcock's Blackmail.
What happened last night?
Let me go!
Why don't you tell me? Look. You know what I found there? Any news of the murder?
No, nothing yet.
Are you, quite sure?
What the hell business is of yours, anyway?
What a chance for blackmail.
We decided to do Blackmail, and what I love about this is the release came out in July 28th, 1929, and I thought it'd be great if we made a phone call to another buddy of ours who's on the call today. He is going to be sitting down. He watched the movie with us. He is a diehard horror fan, has his own podcast, Journey with a Cinephile. He is somebody we've known since, Dave, I think he came when we were in fourth grade, fifth grade?
Yeah, fourth grade, yep.
Fourth grade, fifth grade. So, Cinema 100 fans, I hope you guys give a warm welcome to our buddy, David Garrett. How you doing, Dave?
I'm doing good. I was actually glad when you reached out and gave me the call and everything, and interestingly enough, this is a director that I'm pretty familiar with.
Yeah, this actually worked out really well. So, Dave has watched, you know, the horror genre in itself has got a lot of hits, but there's also a lot of misses, right? But if you're a true fan of horror movies, people will tell you that those aren't misses, right? That those are some of the cult classics, some of the fun ones. Those are the ones that they kind of do a deep dive on, and for some reason gets these cult followings. So Dave knows all about that. But when it comes to Alfred Hitchcock, he is the man most famous for Psycho that came out, I believe, in, Dave, help me with this, 59?
60.
60. Okay, so at least around the right area. So Dave's jumped on the call with us today because he decided that this was a good one for us to watch, and I think it was one of the better ones that we've watched kind of right from the get-go. Will, I don't know, before we get in the initial reactions, I don't know what your experience was watching this, if you had a good experience or not. Why don't you tell everybody how you watched it, and then hit us with your initial reactions.
Yeah, sure. So I ended up subscribing to the long time anyway because wanted to watch. You know, it's an app for like more independent films. You know, critically acclaimed films, and I ended up downloading it for a free trial. But I'll probably stick around for a little bit because they've got a lot of good older stuff. So maybe I'll end up catching some of those films on our list here. If I can. But
were you interrupted by advertisements and stuff, or no?
Oh no. I'm pretty sure they only have one tier, no ads. So
So when you were watching it, though, I just want to hit everybody with the tagline real quick. So everybody that maybe is listening to us that didn't necessarily dive into the movie yet, it's about a London woman who is blackmailed after killing a man who tries to rape her. Obviously, we've said it's directed by Alfred Hitchcock. distributed by Wardar Films, and it ran an hour and 25 minutes long. I thought that was kind of the sweet spot for this movie. Your thoughts on the film, Will? What were your initial reactions?
Yeah, no, I think that was exactly it. Hour 25 minutes was perfect. You know, the way that it was cut at the beginning kind of ramped you up a little bit. The quick edits at those first 5 minutes where they kind of get you feeling a little disoriented, for getting ready for that thriller that's getting ready to come at you. So I thought it was perfectly paced, and I agree with you. It's one of the better ones we've watched in a while. So.
Yeah, it had the pacing. You know, I just knew for some reason I had this. I'm with you. I've only seen a couple Hitchcock films. Rear Window being like the one that I'm obsessed with that movie. Dave, I know, is going to give us an education here today, and I'm looking forward to it. But I knew for sure we weren't going to have any pacing issues, right? I didn't know about the acting, and I still 100% didn't know about the acting afterwards. I definitely think the craft gets better as you know, throughout Hitchcock's career and the ensemble that he comes with. But my initial reactions were, dude, this was fun. It was fun to watch a movie like this, suspenseful, and still be on the edge of your seat. I loved just sitting here thinking to myself, holy crap, Hitchcock was ahead of his time with some of these camera shots, some of the way he kind of told the story, not just told the story, but like progressed the story from scene to scene. Some of his transitions I thought were incredible. And I guess I don't know what else I was supposed to expect, but maybe I thought he got there a little later in his craft, because I think he made somewhere around 80 films. Maybe it was 50 films. I think it was 50 films. I think he made 50 films. So for him to be there early on in his career, and this is early on in his career, he's about his first decade into it. I guess I was surprised to see that he was already this good this early. So, Dave, what were your initial reactions watching this? And is this the earliest Hitchcock film that you've seen to date?
No. The actual earliest I've ever seen is he did like a boxing movie from a couple years prior to this that was a silent film called The Ring. That is the earliest film I've ever seen by him. But this one is still pretty early, as you were saying, into his career. But yeah, like this is actually my second time watching this one. I had picked up a double pack DVD that had this and another one of his early films on it, and I had watched that a while ago. And then when you picked this one up, I was like, oh, like, yeah, this is one that I would like to come back to, because I don't really remember it. A lot of his early work kind of all blends together, but to kind of echo what you guys were saying, it is insane how like talented he was this early into his career, especially when we were kind of talking about like Psycho and the Birds that came out 30 years after this, where you can kind of see the beginnings of his career with the shots that he did. And as this goes on, like the tension just keeps ramping up, where I can feel like my anxiety going up with like, what's going to happen here, even though I kind of already have an idea of how it's going to end.
Yeah, real quick. Dave, you might be the only person still buying double pack DVDs in 2024 or anywhere near 2024.
Oh, yeah, I'm a big physical media collector still, so.
Good. Will, what were you going to say to Dave?
I don't know. I will say it's just interesting. You were talking kind of about how talented he was. It's almost, and we've mentioned Psycho and we've mentioned Birds maybe off camera, but it's just interesting that here he's got those goddamn birds in the background when she gets back to her room, right? Like it's so frustrating, and he's just so good at like kind of poking at you a little bit. And the knife obviously is kind of foreshadowing for the rest of his career as well. So it's just interesting to see some of the groundwork here from Alfred Hitchcock. So,
oh, dude, good point on the knife. You're right. That is a great point. Just his use of that as we go along the way. Yeah, that scene with the bird, man, just chirping. I'm thinking to myself, is this scene like too long? Like, is he doing this on purpose? Like, I got to a point where I was like thinking, man, I feel like I got to go kill something right now. I'm getting so sick of hearing this thing. No, I'm with you. Hi, guys. Robert Gifford. I'm one of the co-hosts of Cinema 100 podcast. Will and I would like to take this moment to simply just say thank you for listening to our little show. We also want to say thank you to the hundreds of followers that have been following us on Instagram and TikTok. If you haven't been following us and would like to know how, you can go to Instagram, TikTok, or Gmail and follow us at Cinema 100 Podcast. If you've been listening to us on YouTube and you'd like to listen to us on Spotify or Apple Podcast, you can go to Cinema 100. And finally, if you want to get all of our latest reviews and ratings on the shows and movies that we've watched, you can go to Letterboxd and you can type in cinema_100. Finally, we'd like to do something a little different this season. We want your participation. How can you do that? Well, simply you go to cinema100podcast@gmail.com and you can type in the subheading anything 100. This is your chance to ask Will or myself any questions in regards to old cinema, new cinema, what our favorite actors are, who our favorite directors are, movies we hated, Christmas movies. Is Die Hard a Christmas movie? Is it not? Anything that you can think of. Or maybe you just want to give us your review of the last movie that we watched, or maybe you just simply want to tell us where you're listening from. Either way, we'll take your questions at the end of every show, and we hope to do this going forward. Finally, we hope you guys enjoyed today's show, and constantly, from the bottom of our hearts, we want to say thank you. Thank you for listening to the show. This is Cinema 100. Couple things to note. I found it to be interesting, but I never know if you guys do or not, but these are the things I write down. This was Britain's first all-talking movie, okay? And not the first one that had part talkie in it, but their first all-talking movie. This movie originally during production was set to be a silent film, and it wasn't until he was presented with the new technology, and I believe he was a little reluctant in the beginning to actually go along with it, that they decided to go back and add in some of the dialogue scenes, and therefore at the end of it, you ended up with two movies, right? You ended up with a silent film version of this movie, which is about 9 minutes shorter, and then you ended up with the all-talkie version of this movie. And I think if you look at it, you can kind of see that the movie's bookend, right? With the versions that we watched, right? It's bookend with what you can tell is clearly silent film, right? Just the montage scenes, the way they kind of bleed into the next one. And then definitely the chase scene at the end in the museum, like that had silent film written all over it. And then you get these moments of dialogue. I thought we were going to have less dialogue than we got. So I was kind of pleasantly surprised that we got as much as we did. So I don't know if you picked up on any of that, Dave, but that's where I was at with it. What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, that's kind of interesting. I couldn't remember if this was a talkie or not. Like, I know I had looked up like this movie like prior, and then like kind of read some of this like fun facts you were talking about, this being like Britain's first full talkie, because that whole first scene is kind of interesting where it's silent, and I was like, oh, this is going to be a silent film. And then it's like, I just thought, oh, they're going to have like sound effects with like the trucks and everything. And then once we kind of get our main couple and they start talking to each other, I was like, oh no, this is actually like a talkie film. And it's actually kind of interesting is that this weekend I also watched an actual silent film and kind of figured out that just kind of a fun filmmaking thing that I didn't realize is for like silent films, they would have two cameras that were different, like millimeter. And that's sometimes why the lengths are different is they crank at different speeds. And so what they would do is one of them would be the international cut and the other one would be the domestic one. So I'm almost wondering if that's a thing he kept doing here because, I mean, this technology is still new and it happened midway through this. So I'm almost wondering if that's kind of explaining a little bit on the time difference.
Huh.
Yeah, no, I that's interesting because we learned earlier in the project here that the speeds, sometimes the old silent films kind of have that fast sped up thing, and that's because of the projectors working at a different rate, right? But that's interesting to say that they had a different one for international films. I would have never thought that'd be the case, but we're all working with different technology, right?
I didn't even realize it either, but the one that they had, like one of the special features on like the disc that I had, literally had like the 16 millimeter, and they had it like they were showing next to each other, like the 32 millimeter one, and how like the one will black out because they stopped cranking at that point and they were done with the scene where the other one is showing this actor still doing things. And I'm like, that is so weird that you could literally watch the same movie, two different cuts, and get a totally different performance out of it.
Yeah, no, that is yeah, that's like so Alfred Hitchcockian. I don't know. Will, I was kind of afraid that because I didn't know this until after I was doing the research afterwards. I was like, oh man, is Will gonna watch the silent film version of this, and Dave gonna watch this, and I'm sitting here watching the sound, or vice versa. So you didn't have any of those thoughts, did you?
No, well, I did, initially, because that first 5 minutes or so is silent. I was like, oh, what's going on here? I was starting to get worried that you signed up for something that I wasn't prepared for, but no, I didn't realize there was a full silent version. So,
Yeah, it's kind of like Will. I think it's almost like the overture, right? Will and I have watched some movies that we get hit with a dark screen and then like a 5-6 minute overture, and we're thinking, is there actually a movie here? Let's look at the characters here. Annie Andra played Alice White, right? John Longden played Frank Weber, and then Donald Cathrop played Tracy. Tracy ends up being the blackmail, or the person trying to blackmail at the end of the movie. What is your thoughts on, and we'll take it character by character here, just out of curiosity, when you were watching it, did Annie Andra, the lady that played Alice White, what was your thoughts on her performance, Will? Did you feel like it was uneven? Do you feel like it got better as it went? Or, is there issues with her performance? Because I've got an interesting note on the backside of your answer.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about this kind of right as the movie was wrapping up, about this movie, of all the movies we've watched so far, feels out of time, like from, like art, watching movies over the last 20 years. Like the acting doesn't line up with the same things that I expect, but this is one of the first times where it also didn't bother me, because it felt purposeful. Like what she was doing felt weird, but it felt purposeful. So I feel like the choices she was making and the Hitchcock wanted her to make, I'm assuming there was a lot of direction going on there, felt right. It felt weird, but it felt right. So I think it was a pretty good performance on her part, especially after you get through the, spoiler alert, the murder scene.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I think you're right. Actually, something you said too that I kind of want to piggyback off real quick is, it kind of feels like with all the movies we've been watching, it kind of feels like this movie somehow doesn't fit in with the 1929 movies we've been watching, right? Like this doesn't feel like it's, and I know it's a different genre, but it almost feels like it's somehow a superior piece of filmmaking to like Harry Beaumont's Our Dancing Daughters, or the Broadway Melody, you know what I mean? And that might be a little unfair to say, but it just felt like we were watching a different era somehow, even though it's clearly still in 1929 with all the, the settings around us and the environment. But like it did feel like a more superior piece of art. Would you agree, Will?
Yeah, for sure. No, this is better than what we've been watching so far.
Yeah. Dave, so the note I wanted to tell Will, and I see if you guys picked up on this or maybe in your research, but so the lead actress in this, as I mentioned, was Annie Andra. And she was raised in, I think it's Prague is how you pronounce that. And she had a pronounced Czech accent that felt unsuitable for the film. Sound was in its infancy at the time, and it was not possible to post-dub her voice. So rather than post-dubbing her voice, they replaced her and reshot her scenes with actress Joan Barry. All right, let me start that again. They couldn't replace her, right? So rather than replacing her and reshooting her scenes, actress Joan Barry was hired to speak the dialogue off camera while Andra lip-synced her lines. This makes Andra's performance seem slightly awkward. Boy, did I feel like in the beginning of the movie, it did feel a little awkward when they're at like the restaurant. And maybe a lot of it was just the dialogue that they chose to do and the way they chose to tell the story. But essentially, she's lip-syncing this entire movie, and Joan Barry is the voice of the woman we actually hear. Dave, did you pick up on anything weird like that, or did you find it in your research, or did it mess with you in the way you experienced the movie?
I had forgot that's what they did until like after, and then I was just kind of looking at just like the IMDb and stuff about it, and that's when I was like, oh yeah, that's right, that's actually not her voice because she is Czech and had such a thick accent. I don't think I noticed it a lot And I think a lot of times for me, I just kind of chalked up to early filmmaking, which is even more impressive that the actual actress whose voice we're hearing is off screen. And you literally have her like, moving her lips and doing almost like a ventriloquist act here of reading these lines out and everything. It does come off stiff sometimes looking back on it, but I think for the most part, it's kind of impressive what they did to make that all come together.
No, yeah, I totally agree. And I think with Will was saying too, I actually think her performance, maybe even like the moment the murder happens, right?
Yes.
I think it gets better from there on out. It seems like she kind of, and maybe it's because oh, you froze?
Okay.
Will, we still got you? We have lost Will. We'll keep rolling here. We'll get Will back. I just felt like once the murder happened, I felt like there was, let me throw him back in here. There we go.
No, what happened there?
Will, I don't know what the last thing you heard was, but basically I was saying I felt like Andre's performance as Alice White, I felt like her performance got better almost as soon as the murder happened. And maybe it's because she had less dialogue, but like she was starting to convince me more on her performance because I really bought into what she did in the murder scene. So I don't know if you thought the same thing, but I thought you did.
Yeah, no, I'm right on board with you there. I caught pretty much, I think most everything Dave was saying about I didn't have any, I thought there was something off in the first few scenes with the audio, and I checked the way he did, as far as like not knowing if there was something going on that's 1929 related. Freeze again.
Your body froze, but we can still hear your audio.
Again.
Oh, yikes.
Cool.
He did freeze again. There we go. Nope. This is why we don't do it live, because
I don't blame you.
This has never happened, though, so this is the first time. So we'll throw him in there again. There we go.
All right. Move your office, and apparently you're not allowed to be on video calls anymore. So, sorry. I'm not sure what's going on.
Are you closer to the router now? I know you said you were on the other end of the house last time.
No, I'm actually about the same distance. I don't know what's going on.
I'll have to purchase you a booster, buddy.
I've got one.
Oh, you got one? Oh, yeah.
Right behind me. It's not working, apparently.
We need to make a call to your internet provider. All right, so we're just gonna pick up from the next note here. Ready? Where was I at? Oh, okay, yeah, here we go. We move on to. I wanted to kind of tell you guys about the Rotten Tomatoes and Letterboxd score. So this is something I think is interesting, but because last week's was so low with the Broadway Melody, even though the Broadway Melody went on to win the Best Picture, they still had a 37% on Rotten Tomatoes. Here we get an 87% on Rotten Tomatoes, and we're talking almost 100 years later. 3.4 is the score on Letterboxd, which I think is a respectable score because a lot of the times when people they do a deep dive on these directors, they'll watch all of their movies in a row and they'll compare them only to their other pieces of work rather than a one-off on its own. So I feel like for it to be 3.4 is a pretty strong number. I don't know about you, Will, but what do you think?
Yeah, usually if you go on Letterboxd and it's above a 3, it usually means that consensus is it's a decent movie. And I think with the older stuff, it, like you're saying, it trends down a little bit. So, yeah, I think 3.4 is pretty respectable here.
Dave, thoughts?
No, I would agree with that too. Like, Letterboxd is so weird sometimes where I look at some ratings on like certain movies where you get people that'll just 1-star a movie just for the sake of 1-starring it. So it is kind of interesting when you have a movie this old that it's not even one of his more like seminal role, like things that he's ever made either. So it's not his, North by Northwest. It's not Psycho. It's not any of these like major titles. This is one of his more lesser like deep dive ones. So it is kind of impressive, especially this early to be this high of a rating across the board.
For sure.
Yeah, there are people out there that I hate when they rate something 1 star and then it's like, come on, this is clearly not a 1-star movie. You're messing with this score and it kind of It bothers me, but that's okay. Let's dive into the movie, boys. We dive into the movie. We open up on right away, I will say this, as we're blowing smoke up Hitchcock's butt here. Right away, there is, I don't know, something that maybe you guys can educate me on that I just seem to miss. But the opening shot is a close-up of a spinning, what I thought was a car wheel. Are we agreeing with that? Okay.
That's what I thought.
Car wheel.
Okay, it's a car wheel. But then when we actually get the wide shot of the car, it's clearly none of the wheels that are on that car. So that was just my little nitpick. We move on. We transition to men in a car who are speeding through the streets. They arrive at their destination and begin to walk through back alleys to a city block where kids are playing outside. The men come to an apartment and barge their way in past the confronting woman. They eventually settle upon a man's room who is smoking a cigarette that hasn't been ashed since he lit it. They stop and observe the man who is reading a newspaper. Real quick, before we dive into thoughts on that scene, I just want to note how great right away there's a camera shot here. And Will, I want you to go first. There's a camera shot in this scene as they enter the man's room. They pan in on this mirror in the corner of the room showing both police officers. To me, it can come off maybe hokey, but when you've been watching kind of the things that we've seen, it really, even though it wasn't a smooth transition to it, it still, I respect the effort and the way of telling the story. What are your thoughts, Will?
Yeah, no, I try to throw all of that out the window, right? When I'm thinking about rote or things that seem like they've been done a lot, right? Because we're in 1929. So these are things that are top notch, not been done before, or if they have been, not done this well. And that mirror shot, like, immediately I start thinking about other mirror shots I've seen, like Black Swan. I immediately thought of Black Swan because there's a scene, it's obsessed with mirrors, right? That movie. So like this scene was, and then the fact that the reason he's positioning that is because the guy behind the newspaper knows that the police officers can't see him. So they don't, he's trying, there's some deception going on here. So I thought it was very clever.
Yeah, it's not just a camera move for like the sake of a camera move, right? There's purpose behind it. That's the thing about Hitchcock is that, and we're going to talk about it throughout this movie, there's things that add value to it that you're thinking to yourself, for example, that one of the examples is later on in the movie when the landlord lady is calling the police officer, and there's just this shot of both her and the police officer in the scene, but they're not in the same place. It's just that type of like thinking about how can I shoot this differently, speed this up a little bit, get the same impact where you can hear both sides. I just thought that was the same idea with this camera shot. Dave, what are your thoughts on just this opening scene, where we're at in the movie, and how that camera shot maybe sets the tone for what we're about to witness?
I mean, just kind of echo what you guys are saying. It's so amazing to do something like that this early, just because this is something that we will see even today. You'll have people doing this, but I mean, even have the knowledge and just positioning of stuff where you don't have the camera in the shot, and it's kind of interesting how he can set the camera a perfect location where you can see that this guy is watching them, and just being that much of a master filmmaker this early in your career to do something like that and make it work so well.
Yeah. No. Well said. Yeah. So we move on. There's a gun on the dresser next to the man. He quickly tries to grab the gun, but the police officers get to it first. Eventually, they take him outside past the mob of people and put him in the back of the car they arrived in. After that, the car arrives at the police station where the man is pushed out of the car and into a room with the police chief where he ends up being in there, I believe, for questioning, right? This is 1929, as a matter of fact, so the rooms are a lot more comfortable. You get catered to in a way. You get some cigarettes, and you get to feel chummy until they think you're guilty. So after several cigarettes, and even that shot, the montage of showing that this takes some time, we see the ashtray go from one cigarette to multiple cigarettes, and that just those little things work with us. And what I love is that Hitchcock gives us credibility as an audience that says we're smart enough to figure this out, right?
Right.
After several cigarettes, they seem to go from casual conversation to a very stressful setting. After that, the woman paces out in front of a police lineup looking for the potential victim. She picks the man, and the man is brought into a charging room where he's charged and fingerprinted and placed into a cell. Before you give me the breakdown of those three scenes, I guess I was a little confused on fingerprints. So clearly, this is 1929. The proof is in the pudding. I thought fingerprints came out with Hoover. Am I wrong? I mean, did you guys have that same type of, or am I the only one that somehow along the way had that misknowledge?
Well, there could be some advancements in England before they got here. Maybe they were doing something a little different across the pond, so to speak. But yeah, I thought it came a little bit later than this, but I mean, Hoover's not too much longer past this, is it? Hoover's like late 30s, early 40s. So, I mean, it's 10 years or so, but I don't know. I guess that's something for me to research.
Yeah, me too. What was your instincts though on just the way the movie's kind of taking place and getting set up? Is any of this relevant to the overall Blackmail, the story? Because you could argue that a lot of this opening act is filler, right? I mean, it's just kind of building credibility for Scotland Yard police precinct and kind of the way they do business. Did you find in hindsight this to be filler, or as you're experiencing it, do you find that there's a reason for all of this?
Yeah, I think the reason is just to give Frank kind of some credibility here, the people he's working with some credibility. So we know that Scotland Yard, it might not be true in the real world that Scotland Yard is this competent, but for the sake of the movie, it's good to know how competent they are, so we can, we know this movie isn't going to take too long to figure out what's going on. So.
Dave, do you echo his thoughts, or where are you at?
Yeah, I mean, I do agree there that we're setting up, especially not just them, but like this main character of like Frank as well. And the one thing I'll also say is we don't necessarily need, you could look at it as padding. This does kind of play into the next thing, though, where we realize that he was supposed to be back at the station earlier. And so that's kind of creating issues here that'll end up stemming for the next scene. So if somebody wants a nitpick, I think you could say like, oh, this is filler. Like, we don't need to see this guy getting busted and everything like that. But I do think it's kind of Hitchcock just telling a story to be like, this is why he's late, and not just him telling the audience why he's late.
Yeah, I want to tell you that Hitchcock lives rent-free in my head, and I'm going to tell you why. I want to know what you guys, if any of you just had this same thought as me. Okay, I watched this first 6 scenes. Then I watched the movie take place, right? When we got back to the next time they show that opening close-up of what, we know the car wheel, that's not the wheel that they used. And then we see them riding the street. I paused the movie. I go, oh my God, we're back to the beginning of the movie. I thought he looped this somehow. And I sat here and I said, wait a minute, was that guy in the bed? I like overthought the movie. I was like, oh my God, Hitchcock is playing with me right now. And it blew my mind. And then it wasn't until like I just pressed play for another 10 seconds where I was like, oh my God, I could have just, But did any of you have that thought, or am I just, over my head?
No, that's some galaxy brain stuff, Robert. No, the only thing that bugged me about these scenes here is that apparently Alfred Hitchcock has a very particular way a criminal should look, because the criminal here at the beginning and Tracy have very similar appearances. So that was my only minor nitpick with this. So
what you're saying is you agree with me. I appreciate that. All right. Officially, the movie turns into a talkie. All right. I usually mark down the time frame that it turns into a talkie, but I didn't do that this time. I missed it. But officially, the movie turns into a talkie. And men are all getting ready in the washroom. And this is an interesting kind of, again, you can argue it's filler. You can argue there's a point to it. I think in defense of what Dave was saying is that we're kind of buying, more time for Frank, or delaying more time for Frank to actually get with Alice. Before we move on, I just want to make sure Will's not frozen again. I think he is.
I don't know
He'll
if
jump.
you can hear me.
We can hear you, but you can't always hear us back.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got you now.
That's all right. I'm just going to
Yep.
chop this up, so no worries. Just
Can you
let
hear
us
me?
know. Yep.
Okay. I'm almost wondering if we need to pause for just a second. Let me move my computer to see if I can figure out something, because I don't want this to keep going on.
Yeah, if you want to try it, it's up to Dave. Dave, you good?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah, go ahead. Because I'll just pick up right here. I'll
All
just
right,
read that part
Give
again.
me 5. Okay.
Yeah, this never happened. I wonder if it's not him. I wonder if it's this three-way thing. I don't know if that would
I was
hurt
starting
him,
to
though.
wonder that too. Yeah, I didn't know either.
It's not hurting you though, right? Your internet seems to be chugging.
No. Yes, I mean, I haven't had any issues so far since we started.
Dave, are you watching any of like anything else other than just? Are you just stick to your genre? Do you watch anything else?
No, I watch. I mean,
Like, have you seen anything modern this year from 2023 at all? That's not a horror movie.
no, I have not.
So, like, when I say Poor Things, you have no idea what that is, or do you?
I know what it is. That's on my list of ones. Jamie and I almost went to see that on like a date night that we did. The problem was just that when our babysitter came over and like when we wanted to have dinner, none of the theaters synced up for us to like make the film. And then it being like 3 hours long, I also was like, do you want to like be out that late? And she's like, no, I don't. I don't want to do that. And I was like, that's fair. That's why I told you it's 3 hours.
Dude,
No, but I did go see like Oppenheimer though. I saw that in the theater.
You did
like,
see
last year.
Oppenheimer.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
What'd you think of Oppenheimer?
Oh, it's great. Like it's the performances are just unreal, and some of the
it's a
things
mo-
that he.
Yeah, I've watched it now twice, and for some reason I catch myself wanting to watch it a third. No, I'm sorry, I've seen it 3 times now. I've seen it twice in theater and once here, and I kind of want to watch it again. And I know I'm biased, but I'm a Nolan guy. But there's reasons I'm a Nolan guy, and it's this reason right here. Like, I hated Tenet. There was things I liked that he was trying to do, but I didn't like Tenet. I'm
That's
not
what
a
I need to come
huge
back to.
Yeah, I'm not a huge Dunkirk guy, but I think I like that one more than Tenet. I liked what he was trying to go for there too, but like, you know, I love Interstellar, I love Inception, I love all those other ones. And this one, to me, it's a movie that shouldn't work. But he finds a way to not just work, but like it builds. It's building the like I think Hitchcock would love it. It's like suspenseful from the get-go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that makes, I mean, I've only seen it once. Actually, it was weird. I went to the bar with some friends yesterday because a buddy was in town, and the bar was showing it. And I'm assuming they're only showing it because it must have been like a free movie that was on like an app they had. But I remember just looking over at my buddy and going, "Why would you show Oppenheimer in a sports bar? Like, this is one of the most bleak. Like, I love this movie. This is bleak. I don't want to look up and see like Murphy just looking so stressed about everything." But one thing I was going to say though with Oppenheimer is that incorporating so much of like the like humanity behind the people working on this project is what really sucked me in, where they're like, no, we want to drop this on Hitler, and they're like, no, we're not going to do that, we're going to go do it on Japan. Like, well, we don't want to work on this anymore. It's like, no, we're going to though. Like, we're going to finish the project because we've given X amount of dollars. Like, we're going to go ahead and do this. And just seeing how like stressed all these Jewish people were about like, we want to use this to get back at them. We don't really care about these other people.
Yeah, it is. And going off of that, you've got because like what, Hitler died 3 years before they used this, right?
Yeah, roundabout there, I think.
Hitler was 42, right?
I believe so.
And then the war technically ended in 45.
Oh yeah, you're right. So it would be about 3 years, give or take.
So what's interesting about this, and just the way they showed it in the movie, but like, I think it was. Is it the vice president or is it Secretary of War? I forget what it is, but he's like, oh, my wife and I honeymooned there. Let's not drop it there. It's a beautiful place. And it's like that type of discussion, but doing it so casually as you're talking about, you know what I mean?
Decimating these cities and just killing all of these civilians and just, being just so just disconnected that you're making decisions that are going to affect everything.
Yeah. And I can't make up my mind. I don't think it's a perfect movie.
That's fair.
I think The Dark Knight is a perfect movie. Every frame leads into a frame. And I do think that this is damn near perfect. the only issue I have, and maybe I don't know any other way to do it, but like, is I felt like the third act with Robert Downey Jr.'s character, it gets a little spoon feedy. You know?
Yeah.
Like he's talking to his aides, and he's like, and this is why he thought that and he thought that, and actually to a point that the first 2 times I watched it, I didn't pick up on it, but on the third time, Rami Malek's Will's trying again. Hang on. And that is that's the conclusion of Blackmail. So.
Glad to be here, guys.
Hey.
Hey, I recognize that room.
Yeah, yep. The amazing brown paneling from 1974 or whenever. Sorry, you can't witness it, Dave.
Hey, man. Well, you're coming in crystal clear right now, so we'll see what happens. But
yep.
All right, let's roll. So, scene 6, officially the movie turns into a talkie, and men all kind of get into they're getting ready into the washroom, and this is where I was talking prior about the defense of whether or not there's filler in this movie or not. But there is an argument to be made that we need to kind of delay time before we get to Mrs. White or Alice, because she's going to be perturbed, and this is going to be kind of the thing that puts everything in motion, right? Then we get to scene 7. Frank and his partner approach Mrs. White, who has been waiting patiently for Frank. They leave the police precinct and head down the street. All right. This is where now we're introduced to Alice, and this is where the movie really kind of picks up. You could start the movie from here and you would miss nothing, really. Is that fair to say, Dave?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Because, I mean, this is really where the actual story we're going to be following with these characters really kind of takes off.
Yeah, I agree. We hit a subway. And again, this is only for the cameo reason. And Will, you're chuckling too. So was Dave. And I knew Dave would know, but I wanted to know if Will picked up on this. So a family sits in one section of seating while a little boy of the family harasses an innocent writer. Will, you knew who that innocent writer was, yes?
Not while watching, but I realized after.
Oh, you realized after. See, okay, that's
Yep.
great. I actually knew because I knew that he did this.
Okay.
And when you're watching it, you're like, you fool. Like, you're just like, it's so funny to see him, just kind of casually putting himself in a movie with a scene that has no meaning on the movie.
Sure.
Dave, educate us on that real quick. Do you know when it started with Alfred Hitchcock? Just real quick for the audience, that innocent writer was Alfred Hitchcock. When he started kind of putting himself in these films, and did he do it in every movie? Did he skip one? And the other question I have is, or not even a question, but the other statement I have is that apparently this was the longest one he's ever had.
I don't know exactly which one. I know it's actually funny. The movie I literally was watching this weekend, the silent one, there was an actor that was also in this movie, I think, or like something along those lines, or they just referenced this. It was in 29 that he started doing this. And supposedly he's in every single movie from that point on, at least in some sort of like little like mini cameo thing like that. And yeah, he does some ones where I've watched the movies and been like, I didn't catch him anywhere in these. And then some of them are like this one where it's blatant, where you're like, okay, that's him sitting right there. So it's this year is when he started doing it.
There's a subreddit somewhere out there of people who have figured this out. It's the Where's Waldo of the cinema world. All right, we move on. Frank and Mrs. White enter into the busiest, fanciest restaurant where they have to fight the crowd to get a table. But apparently you can just sit wherever you want with strangers, with enemies, friends. It didn't matter. Mrs. White is annoyed with Frank because she had to wait on him earlier to finish up his work with the Scotland Yard. After a few failed attempts to get the waitress's attention, Frank leaves the table to see for himself. Mrs. White pulls out a note from her purse that reads, "I'll be here at 6:30. Will you?" Mrs. White's looking at her watch, and we see that it's 6:50, and she begins to look around. Frank arrives back to the table after stating he's put an order in. A man shows up to sit at the table with Mrs. White, but she waves him off. Mrs. White tells Frank that she doesn't want to go to the pictures with Frank. He gets mad and storms off and leaves the table. The other man gets up and joins Mrs. White, and Frank ultimately sees them leaving the restaurant from outside in the street. Now, Will, we are going to have to figure something out with this part of the podcast, because as these movies get better, and as Alfred Hitchcock, people like Alfred Hitchcock, who throws so many important details into these scripts, this part of the movie or podcast is going to take 2 hours. That's what happens in this scene. Now, I want to ask, maybe we should wait, and I'll let you tell me, Will, but is it really clear what Alice is trying to achieve? She is on a date with Frank, but she's somehow already has something in motion with another man, and that's not flushed out, right? That's fair to say. That's a fair criticism of this movie, correct?
I don't know if it's a criticism of the movie. I think I guess I'm just not thinking of it as a criticism of the movie itself. I'm thinking of it more of like a kind of like a criticism of that type of person, maybe, like that would be on a date with someone and also be expecting to be on a date with someone else. If this was 2023 or 2024, we'd just be saying she's a independent woman trying to live her life, right? And that's all good and fine. But I think what Hitchcock's trying to do here is just kind of highlight that she doesn't know exactly what she wants. And for me, I think it works fine because of where Hitchcock ends up going with it, in her guilt kind of later in the movie. And also, and we could talk about it maybe when we get to the scene a little bit more, about whether or not she deserves what happens in the apartment, right?
Sure,
Like,
yeah.
there is a type of person that would say, like, well, she put this on herself, right? Because you can kind of hear that criticism, which I disagree with, but I think Hitchcock's it too. Sorry.
Well, no, I guess my only issue, maybe criticism wasn't the right word, but like for me, you and I have kind of had these similar conversations about this woman type or this character type, but I feel like maybe the relationships are not defined enough to us, the audience, for me to really get a grasp on what they are, right? How long have these two been talking? Have they been together for a while? Are they husband, wife? Are they, because at this point, I'm not really sure that we've picked up on Frank's last name, and maybe we have, and I just missed it. But I guess I'm just trying to figure out what the extent of their relationship is. And because I don't know that, and there's this note already in play, why is she meeting him and going out to dinner with him and hanging out with him and debating going to the picture show when she knows that she's got a 6:30 appointment with another man? I guess, to me, either she's wanting to get caught, you know what I mean? Or she's just that flaky of a person that she completely forgot. But I guess I never get the idea that that's being delivered to me. But maybe the interpretation is wrong here. Maybe what you saw is correct. Dave, what did you see in this scene?
It was actually kind of interesting because when I was watching it this time, I was like, oh wait, is this the person that's like blackmailing her? Is this why she's here at first? And like, is like she's trying to make this appointment to do this thing. As we've been kind of just talking here, I was actually starting to think about it. Since Frank was so late to show up, it almost makes you wonder if she was trying to do an earlier date with him and have that end where she could come here at 6:30 to then go out with him and everything like that. I don't know if that's fully fleshed out. And I don't know if that's me just watching enough movies where I'm going to start giving my own storyline to it. So that way, when I'm done watching it, I'm like, you know what? That makes sense to me. That's all I needed there. I don't know if we necessarily get enough of that in the movie to fully run with that theory or not, but that's just something I was starting to think about as we were talking about it, that it could be that where she was hoping that she'd already be done with this date. But it is kind of weird that she is planning on going to the movies with him afterwards, because like, well, wait a minute, there's no chance that you're going to be able to be here to meet this other guy if that's the case. And the other thing I was just actually thinking about too is something we'll see later on. we don't necessarily know how defined the relationship is, but she does have a picture of him in his police uniform hanging on her wall, which I was like, well, that's kind of interesting. But so, I mean, she's at least been with Frank for a while to at least have something like that.
Yeah. Interesting that you picked up on the picture on the wall, or all three of us did, because of the bird chirping, right? We were distracted by the bird chirping. You know, I think you might be onto something, and maybe the answer is a little bit of all three of us. What you said made sense, right? She's perturbed because he's late, because she knows she has somewhere else to be. Now, again, depending on how much you give credibility for how a picture can be on someone's wall, but yet they're still fresh in their dating career, you know, that's, I guess, well, it's more about how you view the common relationship. But I think my issues kind of come into play later on when we look at motivations of, like, especially after the murder scene, of why would Frank do this? Well, Frank's in love with her, right? But there's never any moments of contention of whether or not he should do this or not for her. He just does it, and that's it, right? So, like, to me, I feel like there can be a criticism made about the movie and the story because of those little plot holes, in my opinion. But again, I love talking to you guys about this because you start saying things and then I kind of see greater points that are being made. And sometimes it helps fill those plot holes for me because I don't always see them. So.
Yeah, and I'm wondering too, Robert, you said it earlier that Alfred Hitchcock has a lot of trust in the audience. And I'm wondering if maybe some of that disconnect here is we don't necessarily understand fully, like, some of the social norms that might be going on in 1929. So it might have been easier in 1929 to be watching this movie and say, oh, like, you know, Frank is courting her, and it's you know, he's friendly with the family. We find that out as well. So there could just be some social norms here that we're just not cued in on.
Yeah.
So
no, that's fair, because I'm not even, because that is fair, and because I'm not 100% sure, like, the age of Alice either, you know. So because the only thing we have is that she's living at home, and I mean that's all we have, really. So let's move on. We move on to scene 10. A man paces back and forth outside of Mr. Crew's house. We will later know this man to be Tracy. Alice, Mrs. White, and Mr. Crew arrive to his place. I apologize. Alice and, Mr. Crew arrived to his place. He invites her, to which she says no a few times. He says, come on in. She says no. He says, come on in. She says no. He says, are you frightened? She says no. She's playing it cool. She just doesn't kind of want to go in. But he won't take no for an answer. The man out front, known as Tracy, begins to talk to Mr. Crew, to the annoyance of Mr. Crew. So he's kind of like done this a few times, is the way I've kind of picked up on that. They have a private conversation to which we're not privy to, and then they go their separate ways, Mr. Crew claiming he's a moocher, right? So we just kind of take it as he's a moocher. Now, I will say, to begin that scene, because if you remember, the last scene that we saw prior to that, the predecessor, was Frank seeing them leave from the restaurant. So I thought Frank was outside of maybe her apartment waiting to see if she was going to come back with this guy, and then come to find out it's not Frank at all. It's a different gentleman. And because at that moment I'm thinking, we learned that it's Mr. Crew's apartment, or house, or, you know, room, whatever, hotel room, whatever way you want to look at it. So to me, I was thinking too far ahead when I finally kind of just let it play out and watched it. This guy's just a moocher. That's his role at this part of the film. You guys take anything else from it? Did you believe that he was eventually going to be a bigger character? I mean, outside of, obviously, he's in the movie.
You mean Tracy?
Tracy. Yeah, sorry, Tracy.
Yeah, no, the only thing that and maybe this is one of the kind of plot holes that I feel like is missing here, is what was Tracy's connection in the first place to Cruz? Maybe it doesn't matter. He's connected, and that's all that matters. But he's some sort of criminal. I mean, the Scotland Yard has got his picture in there. I'm just curious, like, if maybe there was some more information we could have there to kind of give us an idea of why he was there in the first place, other than being just a moocher. That kind of felt a little short on story to me, but that's just a minor nitpick.
Yeah, because don't we ultimately learn that he's the gentleman that left the note for Trace, or for Mr. Cruz, that that, okay, because as soon as Mr. Cruz and now Alice, they walk into his apartment, he says, go ahead, I'm going to go grab my mail. He then goes and talks to the landlord about this note that was taken. So that, I guess let's just jump to the next scene then, since we're already there. After going inside the apartment complex lobby, Mr. Cruz checks his mail and begins talking to the landlord. They begin to walk upstairs, and the camera shot, again, we got to note these camera shots, from the bottom to the top as it just kind of goes in between each and every floor. Just ahead of its time. Maybe it's been done before, but it's the first time we've seen it on our journey here on Cinema 100. So it just shows you just next level, not just with the, kind of philosophy and character philosophy, but just like the way the camera movements help tell the story. Anyways, the man out front, they begin to walk upstairs. The camera shot happens, and eventually Alice and Mr. Cruz walks inside his apartment. Any quick notes, Dave, on the camera shot?
I mean, that shot was one of the ones that I definitely noted down while I was watching it. Just, does it look good as to like comparing it to something you would have like today? No, but it's even more impressive to do this practically and to make it look as smooth as they do here is just so impressive.
All right, Will, in 2024, I'm giving you a camera. That's the only thing I'm giving you. You have to pull this shot off. What are you doing? What are you using?
Oh, man.
I mean, this is 100 years later. It should be a hell of a lot easier now, right?
Yeah. No, I will admit that I'm good at noticing things, but not good at doing them myself. So I have no idea.
That's why I asked you before you asked me. All right, we move on. Mr. Cruz appears. We open up the door and now we're in his apartment. Mr. Cruz appears to be a painter. He's an artist. So much so that that's how they credit him on the IMDb. He's known as the artist, which is an interesting take, right? Once we find out what happens here. He and her flirt while painting a picture. He manipulates her into putting on a dress. She comes out and the dress is too small to be done up all the way. She asks for his help as he's adjusting and pulling and kind of shaping her to make her look the way that he wants her to. He goes in and he steals a kiss. She gasps for air and tells him that she better go. As she's trying to put on her original dress, he very juvenile, steals it from her and throws it across the room. At this point, she's frightened and wants her dress back. Mr. Crew tells her no and to not be silly and drags her arm as they approach his bed. Now, for the audience and the viewers, the bed has sheets all the way around it. So as we approach the bed, we don't actually see the bed. We just know that it's a bed. All right. This is where Alfred Hitchcock starts making some decisions. And not just decisions that work, but I mean they work. During that entire kind of lead up to this, there's music being played, right? Or he's singing. There's some type of joyful, undertone that's taking place. Then everything just goes silent. And I think this was had a huge impact on telling this part of the story. Okay. There is no longer any music being played. Alice begins to scream no over and over as he pulls her in and past the sheets. We as the audience lose sight of what's going on because there's a big sheet up all around the bed frame preventing us from seeing. Her hands come out as we still hear her saying no. She grabs a carving knife or a bread knife as it looks. We only see signs of a struggle but hear nothing. Finally, his lifeless arm drops out from the bed sheet. Next, Alice, shell-shocked is the words I have it, gets out of the bed and stunned, looks around, and then she looks immediately right into the camera, breaking the fourth wall and walks right towards it. Once the music hits, she finally begins to gather herself by putting on her dress and coat and begins to walk out, but not before she crosses off her name on the canvas that her and Mr. Crew were painting. She sneaks out of the building and walks away, and there, a shadow figure of what we believe to be the moocher, a.k.a. Tracy, his shadow appears. I know there's a lot there. Will, just give me your reactions from that scene, just the way it played out from the beginning to the end.
Oh, man. Okay, so this is a great scene. One of those scenes that, if you're thinking about making a movie that you probably are drawing on in some way, shape, or form, because it's all there. It's really interesting one thing you didn't mention that kind of becomes a theme is that painting of the Joker, the clown guy. Um, I really, so I've kind of been obsessed with this idea of the comedy and the tragedy, right? And it really kind of came into focus during Succession, because the TV show, um, sorry, short diatribe. I'll try to be quick. But Succession it's a comedy, but Kendall is a tragedy, right? So like playing with those two themes in one story is it's fascinating to me. And here in this scene in particular, he's playing with that kind of idea of the comedy and the tragedy, right? Because at first, when she first sees this painting, she finds it funny. She laughs, and it's kind of a silly laugh, and I kind of laughed at her a little bit. But then after, when she sees it again, it becomes something much more sinister. And I was just kind of really fascinated with how he could turn it just like that. I mean, this is maybe a 5 minute scene from beginning to end. And I was just fascinated by this scene. It was so well done.
Yeah, I actually think it might even be longer than that. Just from the beginning of the apartment scene, the painting and all that. But I know what you're talking about. The actual intense parts of the scene when it starts picking up, it does. There instead of it, which most directors today I bet would cop out and make this really, really short and choppy and get us out of that scene as fast as they possibly can. Alfred says, no, you're going to sit in this room with this girl. Now, he's not graphic with the actual, rape scene, which directors today might be more graphic with that. But again, that's because he's the master of suspense. And he knows that there's nothing more graphic than what we see inside of our own head. So he doesn't need to show us that.
Right.
Dave, your thoughts on just the way this scene kind of, shaped out?
Just kind of piggybacking off some of the things that are said here is what makes this one. I mean, obviously later we're gonna have like tension start to build, but he does so well here where I'm watching this and we can see how smooth this artist is. Like he knows what to say. Like you can clearly see this is not the first time he's ever brought somebody up to his apartment. So he just knows these little things to tell her that's going to entice her to keep staying longer, to do this next thing. And it's almost like he has this whole game plan set out and she just keeps falling right into it. I don't know if it's because she's naive. I don't like kind of going back to what was said earlier is we don't necessarily know how young she is or like what her age is. So that could also be playing into it, is that she just doesn't realize what this guy's end game is. And she's kind of taking him at like face value for all of that. But then as it's kind of going on, you get more and more like, I felt myself getting stressed out being like, oh man, you are literally just getting yourself closer and closer to like what this guy's end game is. And then that almost makes it feel timeless with how I don't even know how I want to kind of say this is something that you'd see, as you said, in a movie today, but he does it so masterfully where you don't have to go graphic with it. And I mean, this movie could come out 20 years after this and it still might work with how some of the things they do. You would just update certain things. This movie could come out now. Like you could redo this story, just change a few things to update it. And that just is so impressive to make a movie this long ago that still has things that we still use today. And like not only just conventions, but just plot points and everything like that. So that's kind of what really kind of stuck with me watching this. And we really get to start seeing how good of an actress she is to me and start to see some of like her silent film work or like her stage stuff, because that's I think was what she was doing before all this, where you can kind of see where she doesn't need to talk too much after this point. She does so much with her facial expressions and body language.
Yeah, the whole next scene is that. Real quick before we move on, you said the word timeless, and I think what is interesting about her character is I think we're kind of getting a picture as we talk this out. She is a little younger than maybe we originally thought, right? Because do you remember when we were younger and there's good things here, but there's also bad things. We're all Christopher Columbus when you're trying to explore your youth and you're given freedom, right? So like you're 16, you have a car, you get to stay out late, whatever it is. You might have found yourself in a situation that has all the red flags and all the signs of I shouldn't be here, but I'm here because it's the unknown, right? Just go a little bit further. Just see what happens if I get here. It feels and sounds and looks like everything I don't want it to be. But I also have never really experienced this outside of a, two-dimensional setting. I kind of want to know if it's art reflecting life, life reflecting art, whatever the setting might be that you found yourself in. And then you get there and it reveals itself. The mask is taken away. Your arm's being dragged into the room, whatever it is. And you're like, oh, I don't want to be here no more. This is every bit of what I've seen, and I need to get out of here. And sometimes for some people, it's just too late and you can't go back. And I just think they do a really good job of telling that part of the story.
No, I think you're spot on, man. It's what we kind of define consent as now. Consent has to be at every step of the way, right? And that's kind of what she's going through here. Is she wants to see she's having a romantic moment, right? She's experiencing something that I think she thinks she wants, and then she gets to it, and like you said, the mask comes off, and she doesn't want it, but he doesn't care, and I think that's what's so kind of, I think what Dave said, timeless here is that idea is timeless.
Yeah, no, totally agree. All right, this next scene, man, there's so much brilliance in this next scene, right? She's walking down a packed city street in shock as people quickly walk by and around her. So many little nuances in this scene, right? Close-ups of police officers hand directing the city traffic. We kind of get we go back to the arm falling out, and we get a close-up of the Mr. Cruz's arm there. Neon lights show a sign of a hand stabbing a knife back and forth, which I'm not really sure what that was portraying. I know what it said, but it didn't really match up. But we'll just move on. The night becomes morning, and Alice is still out on the city streets. She cannot shake this. She sees a homeless person in a close-up of his hand. And as she approaches the homeless person, I mean, the transition from here to the next scene is incredible. She screams. But you know who else is screaming? The landlord, as now we're taken into the apartment, and for some reason she needed to talk to Mr. Cruz or whatever. She finds herself in there and she sees a dead Mr. Cruz. The screams are heard as we transition, find dead Mr. Cruz. Another great camera technique of the landlady talking to the cops, and this is one I've already alluded to. She calls the cops. She's facing, left to right on your screen as you see it. And instead of just taking her word that the cops are on their way, he decides to show us a police officer having the conversation with her, also facing left to right, a little lower on the screen. But somehow it worked. And I'm not sure outside of just playing around with your craft, like hours on end, that you would ever stumble upon this idea if you didn't do that. I just don't know how anybody else would have came up with that type of concept. So, Dave, I'll give you first word on this scene, what it meant to you, what it means to the movie, and just any of the techniques that you saw.
Oh, yeah. Like, there's the fact that she's walking, like, all night, just so traumatized by what she's done and just the guilt that she's feeling. It's so great just kind of seeing just how shell-shocked she is from all of that. And just what she's conveying by all of this. And, like, I did love, it's a little bit cheesy, but I still enjoyed it, the like neon lights for the bar where it's showing like the shaker moving and then it cuts over to like the stabbing thing. Kind of funny talking about going back to things that Hitchcock will do throughout his career. I mean, that's literally like the Psycho thing where the knife being brought down like that and everything. So, but yeah, there's just so much they do here. And just the fact that she walks all night, that this has messed her up that bad, which I mean, for good reason. I mean, in self-defense, she killed a man, and just showing that like a normal person probably is not going to be able to live with themselves, and just her trying to come to terms with what to even do next. And she's taken all night and still doesn't know what she wants to do.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Will, what did you see?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say it much better than that, to be honest. I mean, this is, I thought a lot here of like Crime and Punishment. It's a book by Dostoevsky, where the main character murders his landlord and thinks he gets away with it, but he can't get away with it because he can't, overcome what he did. And that kind of same thing is happening here, where that guilt of killing someone, even if it was in self-defense, is something that she might not be able to live with. So just done pretty masterfully here.
Dude, you just gave me a great tagline to a movie. You ready? Here it is. Sorry, it's stupid, I know. But she can't get away with it because she can't get away from it. Ooh, right? Anyways, we move on. Frank shows up to the apartment with his partner, Edgar, and another sergeant. They are analyzing the crime scene. Frank is looking around the apartment and stumbles upon a glove. He goes to tell his partners that he found a glove, but first gets a glance of Mr. Crew, the dead man, in the bed, and then realizes who that glove belongs to. He says nothing. Alice is then still walking the city streets, arrives to her home, sneaks up the stairs, and jumps into her bed immediately to make it seem like she's been there all night. Her mother wakes up. By the way, quietest stairs ever, right? Just no. Yeah, it must have been carpeted. I just didn't see that close enough. Yeah. Her mother wakes her up and tells her to get out of bed after stating, you're going to make people think that you just got home or something like that. I can't remember what the line was, but Alice then gets dressed and gets around and comes downstairs to her dad's store. They're both the same thing. A lady customer gabs on about the murder and her thoughts on it. And I want to talk about the dialogue there real quick. I know usually we finish the scene, but the way she's gabbing on about this. Now, communication is spreading quickly in this city, right? I mean, we get from the next morning to the police has been called. Somehow it's not quite in the papers yet, I don't think. Maybe it is. But the town knows about this murder. So, of course, in 1929, this becomes gossip. She's talking in the way she's talking. The lady, right? She's talking and mentioning the knife over and over and over again. Knife, knife, knife. And she said something like, this is just not the British way. I almost thought in 2024, there's another line that's added where this isn't the British way. This is the American way, right? There's another line. No, I'm dead serious. I just found that to be kind of interesting that even in, 1920s, the way that they view violence is still different than the way, you know what I mean? Where we look at sexuality as more taboo, they look at sexuality as more open, and vice versa when it comes to kind of crime and violence. I'll finish the scene, though. Finally, Frank shows up to the store and talks with Alice, trying to get her to talk about last night. He shows her the glove that he found. He reassures her that it is the only piece of evidence linking her to the crime scene. Then the moocher man shows up, a.k.a. Tracy, asking one too many questions and ends up showing Frank and Alice that he has, I believe, the other glove, correct? Mm-hmm. Tracy begins to leverage cigarettes and breakfast and antagonizes Frank and Alice. So, Dave, what are your thoughts on now we're kind of seeing Frank in action here? Now, I'll admit, because of the earlier criticisms that I had of the film, I'm okay with Frank going to action on behalf of Alice. My issues aren't necessarily with this part of the film, but as I say this, guys, this is scene 15. There's only 19 scenes in this movie. We're near the end, and it feels like we're still in the middle. We haven't even got, this is the first time Blackmail is even reared its head, and it's at the 60-minute mark. So it begs the question of whether or not this movie is actually about blackmail or not. But that's a big question. We'll get there to the end. Just, Dave, tell me about Frank's motivations, if you think it matches up with where his character would be.
What's kind of interesting is that something that kind of happened earlier is that she left her glove at their first table they stopped in at the restaurant. So that's setting the stage that happens. So when that glove is found there, and then it's actually also interesting with that scene at the restaurant is he wants to go see that movie because it's supposed to be about Scotland Yard, and he's going to critique it because it's they're probably not going to have everything. They're not going to do things by the book and not do things right. And we're literally seeing him being unethical here, where he's going against his job and hiding evidence to protect her. So it's kind of it made me start thinking well, wait a minute, you are covering up evidence because it's somebody that you care about, which I'm with you though. Before I would turn that evidence over, I might be what he's doing here is I want to talk to her. I want to get figure out what her side of the story is, just so that way she doesn't incriminate herself or say something that could get her into trouble and everything like that. But this is where the tension just really starts to ramp up with Tracy and just how smug he is and how he just really derails this couple's whole life at this scene as it starts off here.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's why the decision to make her live in her dad's store, essentially, right? Because he's coming to her place where you'd think would be a private conversation and they could get through everything they need to, but they kind of need a public place where they keep getting interrupted, the conversation can't be had, and somewhere where Tracy can feel comfortable enough just kind of moseying into town. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Will, what did you see?
Yeah, I mean, this is the claustrophobic scene, right? They keep going in and out of that stupid phone booth. There's people on top of on top of her, like she can't breathe. They're talking about the murder. She's just, everything's on top of her in this scene, and I was getting stressed out. I'll tell you that. So this for me, this was kind of the claustrophobic scene where she couldn't get out of the situation. Everything was on top of her. So I thought this scene was really important, not just because you're setting the scene for Blackmail, but because she can't get away from the situation at all. Everything's right on her right here.
Yeah, dude, what a great word. Great word. Like, this is the claustrophobic scene. It really is, to every part of it, because they're just trying to get the answers out, trying to have this conversation in this guy. And again, it's a slow scene, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's done, again, Hitchcock just makes you live in it. And you, the viewer, are kind of like, oh my God, like, can we please? Because so he's kind of choking us in a way, right?
Yes.
And those are the genius elements when a director can not just do that to his characters in his movie, but have a physical impact on the audience sitting in a seat watching it. It takes thought, care, and just pursuit. We move on. Scene 16, the police station. Landlord is being questioned about who left the note for Mr. Crew. They go through their records and come up with Tracy. Now, this was comical to me. There's some camera techniques here that I thought might have been a little overkill, but I love how they just seem to have a yearbook on every criminal that's ever they're flipping through the pages. And not only just off of her, not quite brunette, but not quite blonde, just off, and his collar was open a little bit because that means he wears the same shirt everywhere he goes. And after hours and hours of searching, they found exactly who they were looking for. Back at the store, Tracy's enjoying his breakfast, really milking it for everything it is. Frank gets a call. The context of the call, we don't know. Frank walks back into the dining room, but we can kind of get an idea. He tells Tracy that the Scotland Yard police are on their way to come and get him. He begins to barter with Frank. Finally, the police show up and Tracy jumps out the window. I don't even really have a question here. I'm just going to let you talk, Will. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, another foreshadowing, right? It's not the only glass that's going to break in this movie.
Oh my God, Will with the hitters today, dude.
Yeah. So no, there's definitely some, sometimes you just got to have a little bit of fun too, right? While you're doing stuff. And this is one of those, I think Hitchcock was just having a little fun because you don't actually see the glass break, right? You just hear it and then he's through the window. So it just reminded me a little bit of like those moments when maybe you're making some films when you're younger and, you don't have the tech to do it. So you just kind of, things turn out funnier than they're supposed to be. I think he's playing around a little bit here.
Dave, what do you think?
No, I would agree with that. That actually kind of makes some sense there about him just jumping out of a window while they're sitting there, just having around but it's also kind of interesting too, is that he had such a place of power earlier in this scene where he was making everybody sweat. And it's actually kind of interesting that Frank turns the tables on him because he's like, well, the cops are coming here. And he's like, they're going to believe me over you. Like, you're a criminal. Like, you have a criminal record. There's nothing you're going to do here. And then you start seeing Tracy sweat where he's like, I was just messing around. Like, this isn't what I was actually going to come here to do and everything. And I mean, it's interesting that his tension rises so much that he's like, I'm done. Jump out the window and just start scampering up this building that's right behind him and everything.
That's the dialogue we needed right there. Frank, I'm just messing around, man. Like that's the delivery we needed right there. Will, great point on the foreshadowing. You say things like that, and it just you can't help but think if everything else is so tactful, so purposeful, that was done on purpose. That's foreshadowing, dude. It's so like you as a viewer are not going to sit there, watch that, and go, "I bet in about 10 minutes that dude's going through some glass," right?
Right.
But when you watch it back and you have these types of discussions, you're just like, I don't even know what to say. It's so great. It's just great. Good for you, Alfred. All right, we move on. Close up of a spinning tire, and this is where my dude he had me. We're back at the beginning, I thought. Close up of a spinning tire, and once again, car speeding through the streets. Tracy jumps out of the car and begins to run away from the police. The police find him running through a museum. Interesting choice. And ultimately gets taken out to the top, where he is now climbing to the top of the atrium from the outside, only to fall through that very glass that Will was just talking about to his ultimate doom. Next shot is of Alice writing a letter to Frank stating that she is going to turn herself in because she can't bear Tracy going down for something she has done. Now, this is interesting. You know, if you play with fire, Tracy, you could ultimately end up getting burned, right? Because when you're sitting here and you're watching this, you are thinking to yourself, holy crap, Tracy is innocent, right? He didn't do this. So as shady as a person as he is, or maybe as a moocher, or if he's trying to take control of a situation, it's like, does he deserve death? But ultimately, sometimes when you play with fire, you get burned. Things like that can happen. I find it interesting, too, that when you're in a situation where you know you have nowhere else you can go, right? So he's in the middle climbing this thing, clearly climbing to the top of a point on top of a building. There's nowhere else for him to go except to go down or to go back with the police officers. I find it interesting that we as people have to keep going to the very end where we really can't. You're at the cliff. It's like the end of it, you know? And I think it's interesting that they continue to push that. So, Will, this is the second to last scene. We know Tracy's going to die. The suspense is being built. Now we're thinking, okay, now we don't want Alice to turn herself in because ultimately she did kill Mr. Cruz in self-defense, so we don't want her to go to jail. But it seems that the story is going to lead us there. Where are you at this point in the movie as far as the suspense with you? Are you on the edge of your seat, or do you just believe that this is going to work itself out in the end? Where are you at?
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely at the edge of my seat here still. You just don't know what's going to happen at this point because she seems pretty committed to not letting Tracy go down for the murder, and you also don't know like what could happen if she does admit to it. Like what happens to her? Is this something that she can explain as self-defense? Are they going to believe her because she took so long to report it? What happens to her and Frank? Like there's just a lot of kind of unknowns here, and you're not sure exactly what's going to happen. So definitely suspenseful at this moment still.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. It's like even if she came out in the beginning, right? This is 1929 Britain. You know, I don't know all the ins and outs of that, but you got to feel like there's some parallels to America where man kind of has dominance, right? Like who's going to believe this girl? Even if she didn't kill him, it's still something that she has to live with. And who's going to buy her story in the first place? She's just some young girl that, is looking for a night out or whatever. That stuff. Those are the same things that kind of take place in America too in 1920s, male dominated world. Dave, your thoughts on kind of the way this scene played out? Will alluded to the foreshadowing with the glass and him ultimately dying. Interesting director's choice, storytelling choice. There was a way for maybe us to have our cake and eat it too, but he says, no, Tracy's got to go. Is that the right decision?
Well, it makes it interesting because she comes to that decision and then we already know that he's dead. So then it's like, oh, if you would have done this 5-10 minutes earlier, he's still alive, but because you waited to do this, and then you're almost like, well, what's going to happen then if she turns herself in? So that's some like great things to kind of mess with there where she's too little too late. But then now it's almost like I was on the edge of my seat as well, and I was like, oh my god, are they both going to end up taking the fall for this? Because I mean, ultimately, Tracy shouldn't die. Did he commit a crime because blackmail and extortion type thing is illegal? Yes. Not punishable by death. Like, now he is a career criminal, or at least has a record, so they're probably going to be a little bit harsher on him because he does have a criminal record. But then it also kind of goes back to the idea, yeah, she's a young, naive girl. They might not throw the book at her because of she's young. She, like, how this all kind of goes down and everything like that, but you'd never know until you get into a courtroom what's actually going to happen. So it's kind of interesting conventions to play with on how you have all these multiple options where things could end up going from here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No. Yep. Well said. Well said, buddy. Let's get to the last scene. Alice shows up to the police precinct. Don't do it. And asks to see Inspector Walls. She walks in and sees Frank there with the inspector because, man, dude, this dude's everywhere. I mean, he was just on top of the atrium there, and now he worked his way down and got to the precinct. Alice gets ready to tell him when the phone rings. Inspector asks Frank to handle the young lady because he's busy. You kind of hear the inspector. I think he said, bring him in. Bring. I thought he said, bring them in. It could have said, bring him in, but I thought it was them in. And ultimately we get there. They both walk back out into the lobby where Alice admits her wrongdoing with Frank. This is the first time verbally she's actually been able to tell him what's happened. And he just says, I know. He knows, right? Mm-hmm. Immediately after that, another cop comes up to them and kind of cracks a joke about women being in the police force, and they begin to laugh, right? So that kind of tells you male-dominated. That kind of answered that question that we just asked. They begin to laugh, and Alice is laughing too, but reluctantly, right? But it is this contrast of comedy and tragedy, Will. Mm-hmm. And maybe this is where it peeks his head again because she's kind of like, ha, ha, ha. And then all of a sudden, the paintings of the Joker or whatever you believe that to be from the apartments, both paintings, hers that they drew together and the one that she kind of tried to destroy from the apartment, make their way into Inspector Wall's room and movie. So, Dave, I'm going to let you go first. What does the interpretation of the paintings at the end of the movie mean to you? And what do you think it means to Alice when she sees it? Because I don't believe the viewer at this point thinks, oh my God, she got away with it. But now the movie is getting ready to tell us that the case is about to be open again. I don't think that's what's happening. I think there's supposed to be some type of psychological effect on Alice going forward. Did you have the same conclusion or did you have a different take?
No, I actually kind of have that same kind of belief on it because going back to something that Will had said is that at first when she sees it, she laughs. And then this becomes almost like a reoccurring image that she has where it feels like it's mocking her. And this is almost like a kind of visual representation they're using here of her guilt or like her feeling like these like feelings. So to me, it kind of feels like with that painting going in, because I'm assuming they're going to be keeping it in like the evidence locker room to kind of shut the case because they're just assuming that or whatever, they might have it still open, so they're going to hold on to the evidence or whatnot. I kind of took it as that is still her. It's going to be haunting her forever or however long it's going to take her to come to terms with this. And that's kind of just like they're going to hold on to it. And this is going to be her trying to figure out what she's going to do going forward. Because I still don't think she's going to end up admitting to anything. Because I think Frank is going to kind of help keep the evidence away from her. And so, I mean, I'm not really sure what she's going to end up doing from that point, though, as she tries to come to terms.
Will, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's all about Alice, honestly. I think we're supposed to be thinking about what she's feeling and how she's kind of coming to terms with what happened to her. Because, you know, I think what's interesting kind of looking back at that scene after she kills Cruz is she in shock initially at the fact that she killed someone, or is she in shock of having almost been raped? Like, what's going on there? Because I don't want to lose sight of that, because she didn't just kill a man in self-defense. She was almost raped. So there's a couple of different things going on there, and it's hard to know exactly which one might live with her longest, And it's just kind of fascinating that he throws that painting at us one more time, to kind of like pointing the finger at her, like, "Hey, this is you." So I can't see this as anything other than we're supposed to be thinking about how Alice is dealing with this.
No, I agree. Yeah, yeah, it's interesting what you just said because we kind of did talk about it from the murder aspect of it, but to me, they're all kind of it's the same experience, right? So to me, I looked at it like she's, it's not compartmentalized a little bit. It's the same experience. She's out now. She's just committed this murder, but it's everything. It's like she's got it. It's almost like real surreal life overload. Like I can't believe all these things just happened to me at once. Because I got to be honest with you, the ending, although impactful, I don't know how practical it was of like why these two pieces that don't have a semblance of blood on them. We're not looking at scanning fingerprints yet. Like even the murder scene itself, I was waiting to see some type of like on the white kind of nightie that she had on, some blood somewhere, or you know what I mean, something like that. And maybe there's some rules in Britain of what you can show and can't show at that time. Maybe that's something that we'd have to do a little more research on. I don't know, but I just know that there wasn't any. So when you kind of look back on it, you're thinking to yourself, like, why are they dragging these paintings of all things, not the knife, these paintings. So, but again, without looking too much into it and just kind of taking it at face value, there's something that he's trying to tell us there, and it sounds like we all kind of had the same interpretation. We did the movie. So let's ask the four easy questions now. Dave, I'll let you go first, and then I'll have Will go because Will have 5. Should this movie have been drafted in our 1929 draft class, Will? Or Dave?
I think so. I think this is definitely probably one of the better early Hitchcock films. So I think this is kind of an interesting one to look at, especially if you're going to be running through like a select group of films from this year. I think this is a solid representation, especially because, as we've kind of been talking about already, there is some timeless things here. So it's kind of impressive to watch this with like today's eyes, just to see how there are things that are still paralleled.
Will?
Yeah, even if this wasn't Hitchcock, the fact that it was the first Britain full talkie, I think counts for something. And then also like, it's a thriller, and we haven't done one of those yet. So to get an early thriller, it could be this good because it's Hitchcock, but also to kind of feel out the genres early on, I think is going to be important too, because we want to trace some of that genealogy there. So.
Yeah, and we also had to scratch Will's international itch. No, I agree. I think what I'm looking forward the most is to see at what point when we start watching these movies, do the movies seem to catch up to what Hitchcock did in this film, right? Like when do some of these shots become commonplace and we're not wowed by them anymore? Because we're going to see some of these shots come back up in some other movies, Will, whatever year that shows its face. And at some point, it's going to be like, oh, we've seen this a million times, but we're going to know where it started, right? And again, we don't even know that it started here. He might have been ripping off somebody else because we haven't seen every movie, but, we do know where the roots lie, and we're getting closer to it. Dave, is this movie a rewatchable? For you, obviously, this is your second or third time watching it.
Yeah, I would say this is a movie that I wouldn't necessarily say you need to come back to regularly. I think this is one that if you enjoyed it the first time, this is a fun one, I think, to come back to like maybe every 5 years or just more periodically. This isn't one that I would be like, this is an every year watch, just because I don't necessarily know, outside of like the techniques and like the acting, there's not a lot of stuff that I think you're going to keep pulling out of it with multiple viewings.
I'll say this. So my definition of rewatchable is kind of our generation, old school. You're flipping through the channels. Mm-hmm. It's on. This scene's up. So I will definitely watch the murder scene if it's on. I would watch it, every time. And there's a few other scenes throughout. that I would watch. As far as a whole, if those scenes weren't on, I would probably say, oh, there's that movie we watched and keep going. But I do think the movie is entertaining enough to be a rewatchable. I would come back and watch it. Where there are others, Will and I have talked about other movies on this project that we just won't watch again. So, Will, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think this movie is rewatchable for two reasons. I think sometimes you can define a rewatchable as, do I want to show this to someone? Like, and I usually use my Molly as a judge, right? My wife, because if I think she would like it, then I want to rewatch it, right, with her. But also, is it rewatchable because I don't like to give movies 5 stars, on that first watch, because I haven't felt it out enough, right? So is this movie rewatchable because I think it could be 5 stars? Do I think this is a masterpiece? I do think it could be a masterpiece. So, yeah, I would call this rewatchable.
Interesting. All right. Well, he kind of stooged off my next question. Is this movie a masterpiece? Dave, the floor is yours.
I wouldn't necessarily call it a masterpiece, but what I will give this one extra credit for is just some of the historical value, because that's one of the big things that I've started to kind of run into with watching older films, is the fact that this is like the first full talkie from the UK. That's impressive. Like, that just right alone gives it like historical value for me. Being that it's also early Hitchcock, and just seeing how like ahead of the game he is to a lot of filmmakers, I think that does put it very close to being a masterpiece, just because of like those two factors for me. But I don't have it up there as a score for being a masterpiece, but that's also not saying, like, I mean, there's also a wide range of scores below that still, it kind of falls. I still think this is a really good film.
So, Will, before I let you give your answer, because I kind of heard what you said earlier. The way I kind of look at masterpieces, like, I still think a movie can be a 5 on Letterboxd, right, and still not be classified as a masterpiece. And I'm kind of having that same dilemma right now with Oppenheimer, because I think Oppenheimer is a masterpiece. I think it's a 5, but I do have issues with certain things. And, my issue, like, Will, you weren't on the call, but Dave and I were talking off camera here about, is Act 3 in Oppenheimer a little too much spoon-fed, or is that the only way they could tell the story to get us to where we needed to be? Because it's men talking in rooms, as the big picture would say, right? So there's that component. Does it deter it enough for it not to be a masterpiece? I don't know. That's where I'm at, right? Where when I look at The Dark Knight, to me, I've watched that movie. I've studied that movie. I've seen it through the lens that, and maybe not quite as close as this, but it feels like The Dark Knight to me is a perfect movie where everything bleeds into the next thing. And so that to me is a masterpiece. This movie, wouldn't classify as a masterpiece, but that's because I'm looking at it from the scope of all movies, right? If you're sticking to 1929, there's no way you leave the theater and say that this movie's not a masterpiece, because it's so ahead of its time, camera movements, so ahead of its time with the way he's building suspense. I have issues with, character character arcs, and whether or not motives would be there and whatnot. But as far as the time frame, so I think we just need to define more of what we're looking for in the criteria. But Will, you get to set your own criteria. So did you come to a set of terms? Is it a masterpiece to you?
Well, I think the other thing I want to bring up before I answer the question too is we can kind of fall victim to a director having so many masterpieces that you forget that he has a few more masterpieces. Like, I think Denis Villeneuve is going to be one of these directors, because his last like 3 or 4 movies have been so good that I think people look back at his older stuff and think, oh, well, he was, getting his, feet wet, but he really found himself. If you go back and watch Sicario, that movie's a masterpiece, right? And I think we might be doing a little bit of that here too with Hitchcock, where, I haven't seen hardly any of his other movies, Psycho being the only other one I've seen. But I think we might fall victim to that sometimes, where it's like, hey, here are the 5 masterpieces everyone thinks Hitchcock has. But these other ones aren't quite masterpieces. when maybe they are. So I don't know if this is a masterpiece. I think it's really close though, because I do think everything bleeds into the next, even if we don't quite understand some of the character stuff between Frank and Alice. But the plotting and the pacing all kind of seems pretty tight to me. So I think it's
No,
close.
that's fair. That's fair. Story's there, right? I just, as far as connecting dots for me, there are certain things, but yeah, story's absolutely there. I'm not going to ask this last question because we like the movie. Usually I ask what would be your why to watch. Sell us on the movie of why we should watch it anyways, because we are doing this project and you want people to dive in and educate themselves. So I won't go there. So Will, I'm going to let you have the final kind of rating on it. What did you rate this movie on Letterboxd as our Cinema 100 guru?
Yeah, this one I haven't rated yet. I'm somewhere between a 4 and a 4.5. I think I'm probably gonna end up at a 4.5 after this conversation, because I was a little worried about how all of the pieces fit together when I first got done watching this, probably about a half hour before I came on. But as we kind of talked through this, right, it really started to feel like this makes more sense after having thought about it a little bit more. And I think on a second watch, it might even prove to be closer to a 5 than to a 4. So
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, hard-hitting questions. This is my favorite part of this show. I don't have a lot because of the content. I had a lot, and I started erasing them. I'm just going to say that right now. I didn't want to get canceled on, I kind of feeling out my audience here. I didn't want to get canceled, so, yeah, so we'll just go from there. Anyways, my first hard-hitting question is the Scotland Yard police force any good at their jobs? I mean, here's some examples I'll show you. The first capture in the beginning of the movie, nobody's in handcuffs. They are chumming it up with him. He gets to casually walk out the back of the police escort. They get to, as they're questioning him, he's smoking all the cigarettes. And then even Tracy, this guy's not in handcuffs. They just got a murderer, the big talk of the town. And somehow they come to a stop and he's right next to the door that's not locked. And he just casually walks outside of it before they realize he's gone. Are they any good at their damn jobs?
I don't know. Probably not.
Dave?
Well, it's funny.
If you want to be a criminal, you want to be a criminal in 1929 Britain. That's what I want to say.
For sure. Well, it's actually funny. The question that I was trying to formulate was going to be something around Frank and him mocking of this movie they want to go see because he wants to pick out all the things that are wrong with it. I'm actually starting to wonder, is this movie he wants to go see dead on because of all the things you literally just said?
Is the movie he wants to go see Blackmail?
Dude, I wish it was. That would have been
so meta. Yeah.
Oh, you said meta. Yeah. Anyways, my second question and my last one, and I don't know if you guys have any or not, but my second question is, and this is about as close as I was willing to go in this scene, but do any of you just casually have bread and a bread knife laying next to your bed on your bedstand? Or any food or semblance of, do you have a Doug Heffernan mini fridge sitting next to you, right next to the bed there? Like,
lately it's just cough drops, but nothing else.
When I lived in Craig's basement, I may or may not have had my nightstand have some food every now and then on it, just in case that I was like, you know what? I need to cut off pieces of bread here.
I'm going to pull the curtain back for our friendship right now. I once walked in when you were living with Anthony, walked into your bedroom, and you were getting ready, putting shoes on, and I looked over to my left, and your closet door was open, and on the bottom of the closet door was like a box of cereal, was a bowl, a spoon, and just like your whole cabinet of food sitting in your room.
I didn't want to dirty anything in the kitchen, so I made sure that I had my little section there. Yeah, that's true.
Anthony's a tough landlord, so you gotta be careful.
Fair enough. Gentlemen, any final words on Blackmail? Maybe something we didn't cover that you wanted to? Did you have hard-hitting questions? Where are we at before we put a bow on Blackmail? Dave, I'll let you go first.
I mean, I guess really the only question that I was going to ask is during that chase scene, are any doors locked in the United Kingdom either? Because it looked like he got up to that restricted area very quickly from what I saw.
This is a great point. Yeah. I don't think I have any hard-hitting questions on this one. I think this was pretty tight. I don't have a lot of criticisms. So, yeah. And as far as, 1929, I think, I really liked Man with a Movie Camera. I guess this is only the third one we've watched, but this has been I think probably the best one we've seen since Passion of Joan d'Arc. So I'm happy with this selection.
Yeah, no, totally agree. Going back to your locked doors point, if I remember correctly, it just hit me. Didn't they lock the door with Tracy in the room? And then all of a sudden, the sergeant just walked in, no problem?
It's magic.
Yeah.
Oh, there were two doors. There was two doors.
Oh, there's the second door. Okay, I missed that. Thank you for
He
clarifying.
was trying to block Tracy from getting out. And then he found that window.
Well, going off, yeah, exactly. Going off what Will just said, Dave, I know you won't be around for the rest of the ride. We will bring you on periodically, throughout the journey here. I think I told Will this the other day. We're currently on pace right now. Eleanor is 6. Is that right, Will?
Yeah.
She'll be 14 and a half when we finish this journey. But we are 1929, and the next movie that we are going to venture on is a movie called Hallelujah. And it's the first ever all-black cast and crew in United States history. And we thought it was not only important to tackle this and to watch it, but the reception in the movie is supposed to stand up to the the time 1929. So hopefully we're in for another treat, because so far 2 out of the 3 movies we've pretty much nailed in 1929 so far. And again, Broadway Melody was better than Our Dancing Daughters. I don't want to crap on that movie. It just wasn't. Harry Beaumont we kind of have an issue with right now. So,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But Dave, do you know anything about Hallelujah or anything from the 1929 scope of movies? We also have Diary of a Lost Girl, and then Escape from Dartmoor will be our next 2 after that. You ever heard of any of those?
I have not actually. So yeah, not a whole lot I can actually. Cause it looks like, according to Letterboxd, the only movies that I've actually seen from this year are 3 Hitchcock films. So that's about the extent of what I know about 1929.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Will, Hallelujah. What's your excitement level, and are you intrigued to kind of see what they did with it?
Yeah, no, for sure. Looks like there might be some class issues going on here, along with some race issues. I mean, the tagline's "Black laborer turns preacher after accidentally killing a man," so it sounds like there's probably going to be a lot going on. I'm interested to see how well it kind of holds together if there is a lot going on, because always a little bit worried about pacing with how they have to slow everything down for dialogue at this time. So I'm definitely excited to see how this one plays out.
Yeah, me too. Just real quick, it says hear and see 100 Jubilee singers. That was the couple taglines. Another one was a drama of the Southern Negro life, and all talking and singing. So there's going to be that musical to it. It is a pre-code. We've talked about that. So there's some things that we'll dive into for sure. However, the next time, and I probably shouldn't allude to this, but the next time that we will be seeing Dave will be a mini series. We're going to be coming at our audience for our Oscars, but by the time this airs, will be long after the Oscars happen. So I guess we should just shut up and get off this. And Dave, I just can't thank you enough for being on. It went a little longer than we previously planned, and hopefully next time we can figure out a way to get you and Will to see each other just so it makes more sense. But dude, I appreciate you coming on and lending your knowledge to this. I do. Hope you had fun.
Yes.
No, I appreciate it. That was the moment you had extended the offer, I was like, yeah, no, 100%. I'm down to do it. So yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed it. wouldn't necessarily worry about the timing and everything because I'd probably be up still watching a movie until I get exhausted anyways. So no problems there and everything. No, I had a blast though.
Good. Glad to hear it, buddy. Appreciate it, and we'll hopefully see you down the road here. Will, final thoughts? Any last words?
No, it was good to talk with you, Dave, even if I can't see you. So
Yeah, that's fair.
And for the rest of you, you guys know the drill. You need to go to Cinema 100 on Spotify if you want to listen to the podcast there. If you want to go to YouTube, you're going to have to go to 3 Dots Media, which is the company that produces all of this. You'll also see another handsome guy on another podcast or two called Bang Bang and Batunsky and Bobby Talks. So, yeah, you're going to see a lot on there. But 3 Dots Media is where you can find Cinema 100 if you want to watch the videos. And then, obviously, go to Gmail, cinema100podcast at gmail.com if you want to talk to Will specifically, or you can chat him up through the comments on Letterboxd as we are cinema_100. We'll see you guys on down the road. Sit back, grab your popcorn, enjoy the movies.
see you.